we were upholding children's rights, Principle 1, and we didn't like the way that it was written, obviously.
Good.
That's always the place to start. So we rewrote it to say that the Convention of the Rights of the Child applies to the digital world. Therefore, when AI interacts with children and young people, AI systems must, both now and in anticipating the future, be researched, designed, developed, implemented, and used to respect, promote, and fulfill child's rights as part of a child-centered design. Yeah? And we wanted, so that's where we start. I'm glad we've got some nodding. I like a little nodding. And then we wanted to say that please don't judge us on our phrasing. It is the content. But here are our recommendations that flow from that thought. That AI is designed to recognize children as being a human being under 18. That AI systems are designed to fulfill children's need and right for an evolving sense of agency, and this includes parents, communities, commercial interests, and government agencies. AI systems should be designed with context and diversity awareness. When assessing problem approaches and solutions, consider if AI system is the best approach. Routine use of child impact assessment and continuing evaluation. Government support for companies transitioning to embedding children's rights in AI systems. That children's rights are not sublimated by adult interests. I'm nearly at the end. That at each level of the value chain, for example, platform, operating, applications, etc., that children's rights criteria are introduced. Children be meaningful participants in each stage of research, design, development, implementation, use, and evaluation.
Wow. Thank you very much. Wow, we got a lot more than we bargained for there. So thank you
We
very
were
much.
an excellent group.
Thank you.
I was part of the diversity and inclusion group, and it turns out we're all for it. That's our recommendation. No, we took the three questions, one of which included how the first question being about how to include children in the conversation, and making sure that different ages came up as an important thing to consider, and to differentiate that and some of the things that were described just now in terms of defining who is a child. And in terms of making sure that children are incorporated, the regional and global biases is something that we raised. But throughout, and moving to what needed to be added or removed or modified in the principle as written, we actually said that there's a lot in the Convention on the Rights of the Child itself that can be drawn from, not to start from scratch, to build off of that. And some of the things that need clarification include, in regards to that, discrimination, so that it also includes unintended discrimination in greater clarity, disparate impacts as particularly vulnerable and problematic in AI needs to be highlighted. Clarifying fairness was discussed several different times, how many different notions of fairness there are and how we can apply that. There needs to be some aspect describing the age appropriate. There are different sectors. There's the younger child and the adolescent. There are different issues. We need to make sure that we're aware of that. Leveling the playing field is also something important in regards to adding to it. We also focused several different times on the question of who decides, who gets to be part of the decision making here, and that needs to be diverse as well, in addition to the teams that are developing it and the data sets that include diverse inputs. Those who are making decisions need to also be relevant, and that needs to be not just on a universal sense, because of the different definitions of fairness, needs to be customized and tailored to regional differences. In regards to what needs to be added, one of the more tricky things that we came across is the manipulation that takes place in the online experience, and how do you differentiate between regular practice in regards to online commerce and advertising, and when children are being who are vulnerable being manipulated. The third question of the specific stakeholders that need to be represented also highlighted that depends on the use case. And so we were very much oriented towards, in terms of diversity and inclusion, that the application and the regional differences are important to consider. Making sure that not just as a proxy, but that children are actually heard, their voices are heard, however official the channels may be in regards to the policy development. Children's actual words should be thought through, and that's it. That's what we covered.
Thank you, Don. Thanks very much. It's 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Thank you. Shall can I help?
3 minutes. Hi, Principle 2, we are prioritized children's original children's development and well-being, and then we actually discussed quite a fundamental level in the discussion over, for example, just to start with the title of the well-being and what is actually well-being. And so some recommendation was prioritize children's identity and agency development. And to start with here, AI system should support, blah, blah. I mean, all sentence start like that. And some saying, if we want to be the center of this, technological advancements, then why don't we start from we should do that kind of the context we had actually discussed at a very basic discussion. And the discussion was what core is like agency loss at this moment. And so instead of discussing like here, the AI system should support the realization of every children's right to develop into an adult here said. And this adult is also quite not well defined. So instead, right to develop own identity and agency fully. And so we talked about this human center, but not only center, but actually taking the agency to become agent. And so from that point, what the meaning of well-being, the second paragraph of the original writing is to say AI system should support and even increase well-being and positive mental health. So here, suggestion was, recommendation was AI system, ecosystem. So system to see as an ecosystem should support and enhance children's development of identity and grow full capacity to function as an agent in the capacity. And here, a full functional agent connect, respect, understand, and is responsible to the self and other, society and environment, natural environment with emotional integrity. Such a way we discussed to suggest. And also, many terms were actually we discussed in the sense. So for instance, to learn and about, so to like to learn about and enjoy their own culture. Here, enjoy is not enough. We should understand to be able to act on, contribute to the society. So such a way that really agency, the active contributor to the future society, and with vision. That is actually our task. I think currently we need to clarify value-based AI system use. And and also stakeholder, we discussed maybe WHO can be really good stakeholder, and also children themselves, not only parents and educator, and from all various cultural background, children should be involved for this stakeholder. And also, some issue about this approach from light. Protecting, of course, it's important, but it's kind of a Western concept. And so if it's UNICEF try to be global, could be more expanding a bit of the approaches to identity development, agency development features. I think it's kind of a universal as well as agent to build a society together is actually, in a way, connection between and respecting a different, diverse culture and value. So can be more inclusive statement could be. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Yoko. Thanks very much. It's very interesting. Recognizing the ecosystem and also the child's agency in their own development is very important. So thank you for that. Okay, so Carla,
Yes.
ensure transparency, explainability, accountability for children. Sorry.
Thank you very much. You gave us a really tough job. Anyway, and we had more questions than answers, but I'll try to summarize. So first of all, we have discussed a little bit the need to define what is transparency. Because depending on who you are and the target audience, we can define transparency in different ways, and that goes, I guess, beyond the children's rights and perspective. So certainly there is a need to define transparency and to outline transparency into the policies. We mean like technical transparencies or transparency in processes. So these are things that needs to be defined. And then what are the consequences once that we break the principles? So, understanding that we get into, we agree on the principles, what are the real consequences if someone is breaking the principles? And who is accountable for? And how do we balance self-regulation with the better regulation? So these are all things that we have discussed. Another aspect that we discuss is that certainly we need to explain what is AI. So certainly parents and teachers needs to be involved into the overall discussion, and also again the need to also to define what is AI. Because it's true that there is not a clear definition. We have some examples that are coming from the European Commission, but again, are we all clear on what is AI? We need to also understand what we want to regulate. So again, what is the target group that we are referring to, and how do we balance global regulations versus national regulations? So that's something else that came out from the group. The private sector needs to be engaged, since the beginning, and also that would help a little bit to balance to find the balance between the technical and the human responsibility when something happens that is caused by an AI system. So who accountable for what, and when it comes, when do we need to take into account the human responsibility around that? Another aspect that we have discussed is the little knowledge and clarity on how system works inside the actual kind of organizations, and that of course then would have an impact to our external kind of communication on how an AI system would work. So I think that I captured everything. I don't know if the members of the group are happy with that summary. If no, fine, good. I did well.
Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Hello. I'd like to thank my group before I start. These are a compilation of all of our ideas, of course. We had AI literacy and protection and safety. So a starting point, which seems consistent with others here, is definition. So what does AI literacy mean? And in this case, we're really talking about something that's been raised in discussions today. How meaningful is transparency without agency? So what purpose does it serve to know and understand a system if there's no viable alternatives to it? We had 3 guiding principles as we were talking, and the second one is who owns the data that children produce? How can this data be pooled and used for positive ways? How can it be used for the opposite? Can the owners of the data monetize the data? We also discussed the compound effect of multiple technologies. So often when we think of these different platforms and systems, we're thinking of them individually rather than how they might be used together. Example would be Facebook's cryptocurrency, launching it to over 2 billion people. What does that mean for safety of children? Is that our timeline? Done. So we talked about the compound effects. We also talked about smart cities and what it means when everything's being recorded and potentially acted upon or predicted. How are we considering children in those circumstances? In the language, it says AI should be deployed. We think that there needs to be needs assessments of how it impacts before deployment. And of course, we understand that there's economic dimensions to that, so how we can work with platforms. But right now, there's really nothing about accountability. It puts accountability on the shoulders of parents and children, as Carla mentioned. So where's the responsibility for the platforms? What are the mechanisms to address if there is a claim? Where is the governance? Is the responsibility, there's the responsibility and ability to report, but a lot of this is cross-national, across different types of boundaries. And so how do we address that? Who will say whether something is harmful? We'd like clarification on thresholds. When we're comparing what is decided as bad, and also different countries have different perspectives on censoring and monitoring. Let's see. We'd also like clarification, as Carla mentioned, about bias and fairness. And our last comment is, and this one might be controversial, how can we avoid being COPPA? Here in the U.S., it's minimal standards for tech platforms, and really it feels more like a protection for the platforms than for the children. And so, how can we move beyond minimal standards and get something that's really meaningful that gives the users more agency?
Well,
so, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we were talking about protecting and nurturing children's data agency, which was a really fun theme because there's sort of a bit of a built-in trade-off there, not a binary, but you can't optimize both for agency and for protection. So that's something that was interesting to think about. We didn't rewrite it, but we did thought about some things that we might want to see reflected in there. One was about age-specific context, so the difference between 5-year-olds and 15-year-olds. We really liked that data collection minimization was in there. We considered revocability of consent as being something that could be reflected. Concepts about explainability in addition to understandability. Trust and trustworthiness is something that could be reflected. And then going back to the making them pay sort of idea is, what does accountability look like? What are recourses that are available? So when we got to the recommendations, there's sort of 2 categories of that. One was recommendations that would flow out of this, as per the example. So some of those were making sure we had legitimate reasons for data collection and use, actually I'll get to those ones later. Encouraging treating problems with the right tools for the right use. Revisiting consent periodically to make sure that it still exists. And then the other sort of recommendations we got to were about things that UNICEF could do. So we kind of did a lightning round and went around the group for suggestions to try to provide something really tangible. Some of which were very fun, such as UNICEF creating a child-safe data trust that could store data in a safe and interactable way, providing toolkits that companies can use to understand risks and benefits and hard trade-offs and make better, more informed decisions, having a UNICEF test where parents could actually basically call Elmo and they would ask, they'd be asked a bunch of questions to see how well they understand what their children are actually getting into and be able to provide and be able to get resources to help understand those better. A kind of flowchart matching system where data users and data owners and offerers, so the actual subjects, can match what they're both interested in a fair and equitable kind of way. And then we also talked about specific stakeholders that would need to be included. None of them will probably be very surprising. Lots of different ages of children and youth, parents and caregivers, governments in all parts of the world, UN agencies, industry players, NGOs, as well as educators. And I think that's it. And right on time, 3 minutes.
Good. Thank you very much. It's obviously, it was a very rich session. The one team is going 15 minutes into their lunch hour to still be talking about this. So thank you very much.